Hi, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you guys as a part of this session. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then I promise you, this will be an interactive session where you'll have a chance to talk to each of us about the work we're doing. We are going to spend most of our time today or this morning talking about campuses as a classroom or campus as a living lab or community in practice. The ways in which we describe this work might look different and manifest differently at each institution. But what we're going to talk about is just three different ways in which we in our institutions have integrated the work of sustainability into the educational mission of the institution. It looks really different depending upon the kinds of institutions we are. And so we want to talk about that and just have a conversation about what we've done and ways we might be able to help inform optimal paths for you to be able to do this work at your institution. I'm Denise McCon. I'm a associate professor in engineering. I also serve as the faculty director for the Center for the Environment at Smith College. We're a small all women's institution, liberal arts institution located in Western Massachusetts in the United States. And we have a number of different panelists here with us this morning to talk about where we are. And we'll first introduce ourselves and then we'll dive into some of the details.
Hi, everybody. My name is Annie Leonard, and I am a visiting researcher at Smith College Center for the Environment, supporting learning about the campus as classroom model at Smith and sustainability education in general.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dano Weisbord. I'm the Administrative Director of the Center for the Environment at Smith College. Denise and I are longtime collaborators, and we currently direct the center together. I've also been the Principal Sustainability Officer at Smith College twice, but was the founding director and have been at the college for more than 12 years.
Okay, so I'm Zoe Robinson. I'm a professor of sustainability in higher education. I'm also the university's director of education for sustainability, which I've had that role for about 9 years. When I wrote my job description, it was to have responsibility for embedding sustainability in the curriculum and the wider student experience. And I put the wider student experience because that means that covers everything in the university. So although I sort of have my title is specifically sort of education, actually my interest in all of my work is around whole institution change.
It's exciting to be here with you today. So, wow, how to summarize in 2 minutes. So first, professor at UPM, Technical University of Madrid, so like MIT, only engineering and architecture programs. And I'm professor of environmental engineering, but now I'm a provost or vice president for academic and international affairs, okay? And we're a huge university, 40,000 students. And that's on the official side. And my interest and new updates from our work. I love, Annie, what you said about transformative learning, right? And how to identify and solve problems. And what we are doing now is first matching this problem thinking and solving with the city. So we are working collaboratively with the city on their problems. So what is at the center is the urban problems. And the idea is to work during the whole programs, all the 4 years, 6 years with the city on solving, tackling their problems, its problems, right? And embedding this in all the courses, subjects, and finalizing with the master thesis, or we also have an undergrad thesis. And inspired by the City Studio in Vancouver, we are doing the same in Madrid with a master thesis, okay? So that's one thing that we have been working in the last couple of years, working collaboratively with the City Council on this. And second, we are now leading a European university, which is an alliance between 9 European universities called ELISA, from the first engineer woman in Europe, ELISA, inspired by her. And the idea, we are altogether 180,000 students of technical universities across Europe. And we are trying to move from teaching engineers and architects to be good professionals after graduation, to work while in the school for the 4 to 6 years to have impacts to solve societal challenges. So we are bringing societal challenges through the lens of the SDGs and working during the whole education on solving these problems and having impact while studying at the university. So it's, I mean, that's the long story short. We can work on more details if you want.
Now what we want to do, just to get us warmed up and make sure that we have shared perspective in thinking about some of this work, we want to talk about briefly what frameworks we've used that have helped informed our work, at least at Smith College, and what we mean with respect to pedagogy, what we know about how people learn, and then how that informs the way in which we teach and learn. We want to talk a little bit about that, just what's influenced us, where our thinking is, and then what we're going to do is go through each institution, both at Kiel University, at the Polytechnic University of Madrid, and at Smith College, give you some sense of ways in which we've done this work. And then we're going to open up the conversation to talk about how we might be able to inform your trajectory at your institution. So the first thing I want to do is quickly share my screen. And what we're going to talk about is just the ways in which this work has grounded our thinking at Smith College. Many of you are probably familiar with this particular framework. It's called Bloom's taxonomy. This is where at Smith we kind of started, right? I didn't know much, honestly, about pedagogy in terms of, I had a lot of opinions, but in terms of understanding how people learn, that was not where I was formally trained. And that's probably true for most of you. So I offer this from Vanderbilt University as a starting framework for thinking about the ways in which we might support learning, right? People talk about sort of at the bottom level of recalling facts, right? So that's where we might think back in our own education a long time ago and think about kind of rote learning and regurgitation versus the more nuanced sense of explaining ideas. Then we might think about how that applies or transfers to new situations. We might draw connections among ideas, right? And as we keep going through this sort of pyramid structure, if you could imagine this sort of flipping as if these are roots of a tree, we are deepening our learning, right? So the ability at the top level to produce new or original work, that's where many of us are targeting, right? When we think about sustainability and climate work, we're preparing climate leaders to enter a world that will be wholly different than the one in which we were prepared to enter. And so this was sort of a convincing moment for us, but at least at Smith, where we started really realizing that there are ways in which we might be able to inform our programming, we shifted that concept over to the work of Sawyer in 2006. We have moved beyond this, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this was a very useful framework for us at Smith to think about the ways in which we might be able to support students as they enter into any kind of experience, whether it's a part of the curriculum or part of the co-curricular opportunities at your institution. So thinking about relating new ideas to previous knowledge. So the information you see on the left is thinking about learning knowledge deeply, whereas the information on the right is kind of what we are been trained, what we were all probably trained with in terms of thinking about traditional classroom practice. So we want to be thinking about relating new ideas to previous knowledge. That's really important, is understanding what's happening in the minds of your students when they enter into the experience. That I see those as sort of the bus, right? Ways to attach new knowledge to an existing framework that the student might have. Integrating knowledge into interrelated conceptual systems, right? So how do all of these different conceptual systems interact with each other, right? Identifying patterns. If it looks like this, maybe it'll look like that. That's like a classic engineering thing, right? But ways in which we might identify underlining concepts and principles. Evaluating new ideas and relating them to conclusions, right? Dialogue is a really big one, and Annie will talk in a moment about that, but understanding the process of dialogue through which knowledge is created and examining logic of arguments critically, right? So we all talk about critical thinking, and we know that it's a little more nuanced than that. Lastly, focusing on reflection and thinking about the process of learning. So these things were really helpful for us in our early stage of trying to figure out, we were doing stuff, we knew it was good stuff, we just didn't really understand why. And we didn't understand if we were kind of just making it up as we go along, right? So this helped us kind of focus on the parts of this work based on what we know about how people learn, and focus on sculpting some of that program with a lot more intentionality.
So I think there are some really robust conversations about what the learning sciences, cognitive science, can inform in sustainability education happening in different settings. Some of those are really focused on the SDGs and specifically the one that defines an outcome: learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. There are also robust conversations happening about competencies for sustainability education. But what I would bring in as a question is how can we, before we are so concerned about outcomes and assessment of outcomes, how can we really deeply understand what learning is happening for students and how our students are learning about sustainability before we move into the outcomes and assessments conversation? And so I think this Sawyer model, as Denise has said, is a really helpful way of looking at what learning processes are happening for students, really thinking about individual cognition. And as our investigation of what's happening at Smith College has continued, we've really begun to also look at socially situated learning as a collaborative progress. We're drawing on Vygotsky. We're drawing on lots of different strands in cognitive science that help us understand how discourse, whether it's peer discourse or mentoring and coaching relationships, are also part of supporting student learning that's really transformative in the area of sustainability.
Now what we want to do is give you examples of what this might look like at our institutions. The resources at each institution are different, the size of each institution are different, geographic region is different. And we want to give you an introduction of just sort of what that might look like in these different places and where are the key points of leverage that we see.
Thanks, Denise. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what this work looks like at Smith College. And I want to do that using the lens of my own sort of, as the principal sustainability officer, my own theory of change that I've developed through working in higher education and industry and in international aid and development. It's fairly straightforward. It has three big parts. And I'm going to give examples of how we've manifested each of these parts at Smith and how we needed to then change the organization at Smith College to really align and to do deeper work. So the first is making sure that the sustainability initiative is completely aligned to the institutional strategy. The text excerpts that you see on the right side and on the bottom of the screen here are out of Smith College's strategic plan. The plan has five themes. One of those is complex urgent problems, which is really largely the problems that are associated with the Sustainable Development Goals. And very specifically, within that, we actually were able to articulate in the highest level plan document of the institution this distinctive interplay between campus operations and student learning. That was a huge breakthrough as a way to sort of say, these topics are important to the institution, and how we execute on those topics is really important, and that we are specifically connecting the operational and the mission related work. So that brings me to number 2, which is to align to the mission. The mission of our institution is teaching and learning and scholarship. And so we need to think about ways that we support both student and faculty scholarship. So let me give 2 examples. The first is to support faculty scholarship, we've created a set of grants that support faculty financially to pivot their research onto either campus or local community sustainability topics. For example, we have made very significant progress and have significant goals to bring local food to our campus and into our campus dining services. In doing that work, one faculty member who is in economics had questions about how we broadcast and advertise food choices to students. And if we made different assertions about the climate impact of food, would that change student behavior? So this faculty member has received one of our faculty fellowships. She's now going to hire students to conduct research in our dining halls using the food that we've purchased and identifying climate impact of that food and looking at student behavior. So that's our long-term hope, is that research project then makes it into the curriculum through her classes. So that's a way that we align to the teaching and learning and the research mission. A second example of this is a student-driven. We had a student named Sally. She's very interested in batteries and battery storage, and what is the role of battery storage in carbon mitigation. She was working with a faculty member in engineering who does work on grid systems and grid integration. And when she came to talk to Denise and I about her work, we were able to immediately say, this question about batteries has a specific application onto the work that we're doing on our campus to decarbonize our energy systems. And that really has to do with the role of batteries long-term in our ability to be resilient on our campus. So Sally's research is now going to inform our operational planning, and we've brought Sally onto a governance committee that includes our members of our board of trustees to help inform that long-term strategy. Third, we really seek to align the sustainability work to the identity and the history and the unique offerings of our institution. Every institution has things about it that are special, that are unique, that are the things that we really want to bring forward. And we seek to make our efforts aligned to that. One clear example of this was our campus is pretty unusual. It's very scenic. We have a long history of ongoing campus master planning and design. We have botanic gardens. We have a variety of different resources on our campus. One of the things, as we've been moving into a new cycle of master planning, is that we had always treated the history of our campus as one that began in 1871 when the campus was founded, rather than thinking about the 10,000 years of human history that have taken place here at our location. We worked with a student who began to do research on that long-term history. Her research on Indigenous history of our location started to enter into the work of our landscape master planning committee, and it ultimately resulted in a landscape master plan that specifically engages our long-term history as a way to also think of how we make our campus landscape more inclusive and how we acknowledge many people and that Indigenous people continue to reside here among us and in this place. This is a significant issue in the United States and in this location, and it's a way that we could connect student intellectual curiosity with our specific place and identity. So lastly, when we thought about campus as classroom, we recognize that it has many different modes. And at the bottom of this pyramid are the things that students encounter, that many students encounter. So they cover more students, but they might not be as in-depth experience. So we know that students get something from living on campus, and everybody does. Whereas at the top of this pyramid, we have students like Sally who are doing deep research into a particular topic that connects to the institutional sustainability in some way. Prior to the work that Denise and I did to bring the Center for the Environment as an academic institution together with our campus sustainability office into a single entity, the campus sustainability office was doing the work that was in the bottom half of this pyramid. And the Center for the Environment was doing the student engagement work at the top half of this pyramid. Now that we've brought those two organizations together, we are working in a more integrated fashion across all the components of this pyramid. And that was a really significant change for the institution, and one that it's consistently a challenge to bring the academic and the operational together and to knit those in an ongoing fashion.
Our examples in Madrid, I would talk about the City Studio first, and then a smaller thing. So the City Studio, it's a very famous initiative started in Vancouver, and the idea is to bring urban problems, city problems to the university to work together to tackle these challenges, right? And we started this year with that, and we launched 9 projects that were defined by city officials, by an interdisciplinary group that work in 6 different departments from the city council. So it's not only about the environmental department, it's also the cultural department, it's also the treasury department and others. So it's a very interdisciplinary group, right? And they are, rising their problems, and they are willing to collaborate with one student and one tutor from the university, and for each master thesis, working the 3 of them, a student with the city tutor and the university tutor, to solve these problems, and using also the campus as a living lab. So the lines of work are, for example, heating and cooling systems, naturation of city, electric mobility, waste management, solar photovoltaics, and they are using the campus as a living lab to try new solutions, but in close connection with the city problems, and not only using the campus as living lab, but working simultaneously in other places of the city, which is great because it talks about upscaling and not only working in the campus, right? And what I think it's really interesting, and it's trying to ask some of these questions you mentioned, Denise, is that what we are trying to do is not working in silos also within this project. So it's not like 9 projects disconnected. We are trying to bring all these projects together and work in a kind of portfolio approach. And in fact, while we did this, we talked with the city council, they suggested this topic, we launched a call for students and tutors. We received more than 40 proposals, we select 9. And then when we selected this 2 months ago, then we launched a session with all of them. And we had the 50 people together talking about their ideas. And just after the first session, there were connections, and we started working between some projects together or collaboratively in some ways, right? So this is what I think it's really interesting, working as a spider web, you know, so at many different points simultaneously. And well, that's one example. And the other is much smaller, but it's interesting. We try to use the campus as a way to connect with some specific courses that are quite far away from reality in normal courses. I was thinking in particularly two, but I would focus on one, which is on the first year of in industrial engineering, and they work on design issues, right? It's in fact the name of the course is drawing, which is normally just working with CAD in the computer or just with the pencils, but very separated from reality normally, or from the real problems that people are facing, right? So what we are doing is identifying in our campuses on things that should be redesigned or new things that could be implemented in the campus, and they work during the whole semester on designing this issue, and after the course, of course, implementing it. For example, at the front of ITD, you were there, we were thinking in placing some benches, right? To have people outside and enjoy themselves and so on. And the dean of the school was saying, oh, you are crazy, they will vandalize this won't work. So we asked this course with 60 students to work on different designs for these benches and work with different students, and they proposed several designs. Then they selected one and they implemented, and now the benches are there. They were built 5 years ago and they are not vandalized at all. They are working well. They are always crowded of people. I mean, not during the pandemic, of course, but before. And they feel that they can implement this to solve also a problem of our campus, right? And this is one example. And we also work with one canteen to bring local products and to have a more sustainable food management in the canteen. And we brought people from different courses and worked together with the contracts with the people who are running the contract of the canteen, and they work throughout a semester to improve the sustainability of all the food that it's being offered in the canteen. So, and that's another example.
So I'm going to start off, I think, by talking about how we use the term living lab. So we don't use the term campus as classroom, we use the term living lab, but actually lots of people use the term living lab in different ways within the university. So actually our director of estates, probably 12 years ago now, very much had this vision of our university, which is a 600-acre campus, as a living lab to test sustainable solutions within our energy systems, and really sort of with this vision of being sort of self-sufficient in terms of energy generation. So that's a sort of living lab, you know, purely in a sort of a technical sort of perspective. My colleagues in the School of Geography, Geology and Environment see our campus as a living lab in terms of we have this amazing sort of resource where we can analyse our soils, our water systems. We can also look at our renewable energy projects. And then I think we have those who maybe feel that they work in the sustainability sphere, who very much see a living lab as something which is integrative between estates, between education, with research, and also outreach, whether that's within the wider community or business. And I think the reason I'm just sort of prefacing that is because I think that's actually quite important in terms of some of the barriers that we also see, and where we could probably do better in terms of seeing other opportunities that there are. So I've got a whole range of examples. We'll see where I get with those. The first, which comes from this sort of idea of the estate as a living lab for sustainable energy solutions. So back in probably 2017, we started a project called High Deploy, part of a much larger national project, which saw our campus as the first place in the UK to blend hydrogen into the gas grid as a way of decarbonising gas. Now, that was possible because of our private utilities network. It's the place to start sort of doing these projects, and that then is being rolled out as long as we get the required safety permissions onto a public site. Kind of at the same time, we developed a project, more of an in-house sort of project in collaboration with Siemens, which was developing a smart energy network demonstrator. So looking at how we manage our energy across the campus, very much embedded in machine learning, artificial intelligence, bringing in our sort of computing expertise there, but again, estates driven. And that integrates into a significant renewables generation project. We're currently in the build phase, and we'll have 50% of our campus generation, electricity generation by the end of the year. Now, that's all great from kind of an estate, okay, we're doing stuff, we're doing sort of decarbonisation. If we just leave it there, then we're missing out huge amounts of opportunities in terms of both research, education, and outreach. And this is why I think this Living Lab framework across those 4 areas is really important as a lens to approach all of our projects so that we maximise opportunities. And I'm not saying that we've necessarily done this as well as we could have. So these energy projects also work in terms of education and research, because built into the projects and the funding is a requirement to work with businesses to support them in a low carbon agenda. And that's again trying to match academic staff and students with business. The restrictions are, because the restrictions from the funding, that they've got to be within the local area. We also have significant limitations in that, unlike your 2 universities, we don't have engineering. You know, we have people who might sit within engineering faculties at another university, but we don't have engineering. And so actually, we really struggle to find the academic expertise and the students with the backgrounds to actually deliver to some of the projects that businesses are wanting. So I think I'll leave that sort of project alone there. There is more that we could do, I think, sort of educationally around, you know, we absolutely are at the forefront of the energy transition, but to what extent are our students aware of that? You know, I think that we should have the most energy transition literate staff and student community as a result of these projects, but we don't, probably because we're not yet fully integrating the education side into this other sort of more estates-driven, research-driven Living Lab project. And again, I can see, you know, that's where if we approach all projects with this lens of looking at all these different aspects, we could have built that in better from the start. In terms of sort of more conventional sort of education-focused Living Lab projects, I'm going to touch quickly on 2 which are quite different. So we run a number of modules, 1st year undergraduate, 3rd year undergraduate, which are entirely aimed at students working on projects set by real live partners. So we run a sustainability consultancy module in the 3rd year, and we work with a whole range of partners externally as well as internally, sort of saying, okay, what challenges do you have and where do you want support? And then we support our students in groups to work with those partners. And that means that they're also developing really important change agency skills of understanding how organizations work. And that's actually, I think, often what graduates don't have when they go into the workplace. They have this theoretical knowledge, but they don't understand how organizations work. And that's why, you know, working with these partner organisations, and I don't think it really matters whether it's external organisations or internally, they're also developing really important change agency skills. In terms of measuring sort of learning, I'm a really big advocate of reflection and reflective sort of journal assessments. And the critical thing, I think, is really thinking through what are the questions that you're asking students to reflect on. And I've done some work recently sort of looking at sustainability competency sort of frameworks and going, oh, actually, if I'd looked at this sustainability competency framework and thought, we could develop these different competencies through this, I could have set better reflective questions for students to just go a bit deeper in terms of their reflection and their learning through the sort of learning by doing projects that they've been involved in. My final example, which relates, but is around using the living lab in the co-curriculum or the informal curriculum sense. And again, I don't think that the informal curriculum sits entirely separate from the formal curriculum. So one example I'll talk about is our sustainable student bungalow. So about 12 years ago, a group of students studying our, at the time, new degree in environment and sustainability, they came to myself and another member of staff saying, how can we live more sustainably than we can in the student halls of residence? And they lobbied the university to be able to use one of the small bungalows that take 4 students within those sort of small houses. And they wanted to be able to turn one of these bungalows into an exemplar of sustainable student living. Amazingly, the university said yes, and it's a project which is still running and is seeing 4 new students living in that bungalow every year. And they are experimenting with different ways of living sustainably. And it's very much a sandpit for students to explore the areas that are interested for them. So over the time, they've built raised beds, they've got funding and built a polytunnel, they've put in rainwater harvesting. There's a whole story about that I won't go into. But also the communal element is very important. It's become a hub for sustainable student activism. They run the vegetarian and vegan society from there. So they have communal sort of cooking. So other students are also sort of learning about cooking. And it's also there as a tool to help other students learn about sustainable living. Students have sort of done blogs, videos, written in the student magazine to try and sort of communicate these things. So it sits in the formal curriculum, and there is a danger that if, did I say formal or informal? It sits in the informal curriculum. And so there's no assessment associated. And so, there's a question of what is the learning that goes on? And we could have done much better in terms of working with students over the sort of many years that it's been running to try and sort of really ascertain sort of the learning that is happening. But one thing that I kind of hope really is the fact that these students within their formal curriculum do so much reflective assessments that we've really been trying to ensure that they become naturally sort of reflexive practitioners. And therefore, in any sort of sustainability activity that they do outside of the formal curriculum, they are also naturally reflecting on what they are learning within that sphere as well. Spoken far too long, I will now be quiet.
Now that you've heard about how that might look at different institutions and ways in which we've been able to navigate these different kinds of frameworks and different modalities in order to support student learning and advance scholarship, what we want to do is talk about, again, remind you what those frameworks look like, and then send us into these conversations where we can break up and just talk about what that might look like at your institution. So as a quick reminder, these are the different frameworks as we might think of them, right? So we might think of modes of student engagement. right? We might think of how faculty find lines of inquiry or project ideas, who the decision makers are, and what their role is in the project. Aligning ways in which you might align with institutional mission vision, how you might address academic, organizational, and operational barriers. While we're all making great progress, none of us are perfect, none of our institutions are perfect, and barriers are always significant roadblocks for thinking about advancing our work. If we have an opportunity, or if you're ready, we'll also talk about measuring learning outcomes. So think about how you might apply this, identify those barriers, think of successes, how you engage faculty. Is there dialogue about your learning outcomes? To what degree are your projects predetermined? And there I would say, are your solutions predetermined? An example of that might be, hey, I have birds crashing into glass. What I need to do is find a cool engineering class that can help me figure out which film to put on my glass, right? That project's pretty well defined, predetermined, prescribed, and may not really be getting at a learning experience that is preparing students to take on wholly new challenges. So we can think about what that might look like. Structures that are in place to then support that work should also be considered. Is there a monetary exchange? Are you providing summer support? Are you giving a stipend? Are you paying for a fellowship? What type of labor is involved? How is that being coordinated? Who holds the project? Who talks to decision makers? So these are questions that we might be able to help tease out to support your investigations of frameworks that might be appropriate for your institution.